Well, hello, folks. Welcome in, everyone. Happy Thursday. For those of you who are new to the Berkeley Research Administrators Group, otherwise known as BRAG, our mission is to provide a forum for collegial interaction in the research administration community. We do this by facilitating presentations by subject matter experts, creating an environment to foster peer-to-peer exchanges, and seeking and sharing best practices. It should be understood that during discussions, solutions or practices might be put forward that are not appropriate for everyone, and it is our hope that members will feel free to voice any desired corrections or clarifications, but do so in a kind and respectful manner. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to introduce our topic today. Go ahead,
Great,
Brenda.
thanks, Sarah. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Today, our guest speaker is Professor Michael Silver, a professor in the School of Optometry and the Helen Wills Neuro Institute. He is also the director of the Center for the Science of Psychedelics, also known as BCSP. Research in the Silver Lab focuses in the brain mechanisms of visual perception, attention, and learning. His team seeks to better understand how the brain activity constructs representations of the visual environment by using a combination of perceptual brain imaging, computational modeling, and pharmacological techniques. Although Michael has been conducting pharmacological studies in humans for nearly 20 years, the initial studies as part of BCSP will be the first in his lab to involve psychedelic compounds. Following decades of suppression of research on the effects of psychedelic drugs in human subjects, he is thrilled to have the opportunity to contribute psychedelic research and conduct experiments that shine light on the mysteries of the mind and the brain. Please welcome Professor Michael Silver.
Thanks so much, Brenda, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak with you. And thanks to all of you for taking the time. I'm going to share my screen so you can see my slides. So I don't know what the conventions are for questions and answers, but I'm very happy to take questions during the talk if they come up, so I won't necessarily be monitoring the chat, but I'm happy for people to just unmute and ask questions if you like. Is that compatible with how you generally do things? Yeah, okay. Wonderful. Well, I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today about our center, which was founded in 2020. So this is the UC Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics, or BCSP. And we started in the heart of the pandemic in the 2020, where everyone was on Zoom all the time and just trying to navigate their way in this new world of how we communicate with each other. And from the very beginning, our center's been very interdisciplinary and has encompassed a wide range of different approaches and programs. And so I think that resonates well with this group that has people from all over different parts of campus doing really different kinds of work. The three main areas are shown here. There's research programs. They include human neuroscience research as well as animal research on the actions of psychedelics. A training program that is training people to be facilitators of the psychedelic experiences of others, or to gain experience in psychedelic facilitation, and then a variety of public education programs that are aimed to inform the general public about psychedelics in a science-based way. This includes our website, which is a major source of information, a newsletter that comes out twice a week called Microdose, and journalism programs as well, with other programs in the works. So the journalism program involves providing funding to investigative journalists who do pieces on different aspects of psychedelics and then publish them in either as books or as articles and periodicals. So as you know, every center on our campus has to have an administrative home, a department, or an institute in which it resides. Ours is the Helen Wills Neuroscience Institute, which has been a terrific home for us. They've been very open-minded about the fact that we do a lot of work that's not neuroscience and is not in any particular, and no particular discipline would encompass everything that we do. So they've been very supportive of the fact that we're doing journalism and public education and so forth in a neuroscience institute. But the members of our team come from all of these different departments and schools across campus: psychology, MCB, education, journalism, optometry, public health, and of course, neuroscience. So why should anyone care about research in psychedelics? I think there's a few really compelling reasons. Many of you have probably heard recently about a number of clinical trials of psychedelic-assisted therapy to treat mental health disorders. Here's one example of combining MDMA or ecstasy or Molly with psychotherapy to treat people with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The graph here, the y-axis is a measure of the severity of PTSD symptoms, and then the x-axis shows how that changes with different periods, different time points in the study. And what you can see is that the people who enrolled in this study who had severe PTSD to begin with, their symptoms improved with psychotherapy alone in the blue, but they improved even more when MDMA was combined with psychotherapy. And there's been analogous kinds of really intriguing results in psychedelic-assisted therapy to treat depression, to treat substance use disorder, to treat anxiety. And so it's very exciting because obviously we are faced with a significant mental health crisis. And the existing tools from Western medicine are very limited in enabling us to be able to reduce the suffering of people who have these mental health disorders. And the promise of psychedelic-assisted therapy is that it provides a new way of potentially improving the mental health of people, but also it's very different than most current drug-based treatments, in which they're really more about symptom management and taking SSRIs for an indefinite period of time as a treatment for depression, for example, whereas psychedelic-assisted therapy ideally would be more of a targeted intervention, and there'd be a limited number of psychedelic sessions and therapy sessions, and then a significant long-lasting change in the individual that wouldn't require ongoing treatment. However, in spite of all this exciting, promising data, we really have no idea about how psychedelics are accomplishing this. How are they improving the mental health of people and reducing their suffering? And so there needs to be just fundamental research at the neuroscience and psychological level to be able to better understand how psychedelics work in the brain and how they're beneficial for mental health. So that's a compelling reason to do research in this area. Also, psychedelics reliably increase neuroplasticity, measured in many different ways. Neuroplasticity underlies all of our capacity for change, everything that we learn about, how we recover from injuries in our brain. So it's important in a wide variety of aspects of society and health to better understand how neuroplasticity takes place in the brain and the factors that regulate it. And so psychedelics are a powerful research tool for doing that as well. Moving outside of the medical world, studies have shown that the psychedelic experience in people without a mental health diagnosis have had very profound effects on them. So having people rate the significance or meaningfulness of their psychedelic experience in the context of a research study, people often report that the psychedelic experience was one of the most powerful, important experiences of their lives at the level of a birth of a child or a death of a parent. And so that's pretty fascinating from a research perspective. How can a particular molecule combined with a certain type of context elicit these powerful transformative experiences in people? How does that happen in the brain? And what does it tell us about the human brain and about human consciousness? So this is also a really compelling reason, I think, to focus on psychedelics research. And then finally, as a research tool, for those of us who are interested in understanding the basic mechanisms of perception and cognition and emotion, it's beneficial to have an experimental manipulation, so to speak, that you know what it's doing at a biological level, and then you can look at its effects on the brain systems and psychological mechanisms and gain insights into fundamental properties of the mind and the brain and consciousness. And so psychedelics are just a really powerful lever, really, to be able to explore these mysteries of these really fundamental questions about the human condition. So hopefully that was a convincing set of reasons to prioritize psychedelics research and to provide the justification for a center like ours that promotes psychedelics research. Research and knowledge in this area goes back for millennia, and in many cases, it's indigenous peoples who've made discoveries about plants and fungi and animals in the environment that they're in, and have incorporated them into ceremonies and rituals, often with a significant amount of spiritual significance. And so there's an incredible knowledge base there from a variety of different indigenous peoples about these natural products that can often contain psychedelic molecules. Looking at it from more of a Western science perspective, in the late 30s, LSD was synthesized for the first time. Mescaline was isolated from cacti in actually the 19th century, and psilocybin was isolated from psychedelic mushrooms in the late 1950s. And so this enabled the identification of components, chemical components of these different natural products that have psychedelic effects. And then soon afterwards, people realized that there's potential in a clinical setting for some of these molecules to be combined with therapy to treat a wide variety of mental health disorders, such as alcoholism, depression, anxiety, and so forth. And so there was a tremendous amount of research taking place at that time, hundreds and hundreds of articles and studies. Many of them don't really match or meet the sort of modern criteria for the rigor that's required to do a clinical trial, but still a lot of very intriguing results, I would say. But at that time, these drugs were not legally regulated. They were considered research molecules or medicines. And so people began using them outside of clinical settings or outside of laboratory settings, and they became very widespread. They were used in a very widespread way in the 1960s by all kinds of different people. And in many cases, without the right sort of preparation or knowledge to be able to use them safely in a way that is beneficial to people.
Hi, Michael. I have a question here
Yes.
that popped up. Does Berkeley plan on, or has it studied? Gosh, I can't. I'm sorry. I don't. Do you see the question in your?
Ayahuasca.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Let's see. I've hidden my controls. Yes, it's probably ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a brew made from a combination of South American plants. This has been used by indigenous cultures in South America for a very long time. For our studies, they are all regulated by the FDA, and the FDA really doesn't like the notion of giving research participants brews or natural extracts or tinctures or things like that. They would like to have, of course, pharmaceutical grade purified research chemicals. And so for that reason alone, it would be very challenging for us to do studies in which we administer ayahuasca to subjects. It'd be possible to do more kind of observational studies of people who are using ayahuasca in other settings. But because we really are in the same framework that drug companies are in when testing the efficacy of a new drug in our research studies. And so we have to work with purified pharmaceutical grade chemicals for everything that we do. So thanks for the question. Continuing the history of psychedelics research. So a lot of promising research in a clinical setting, then widespread use in society. This scared a lot of people and threatened, and it was very much tied with the counterculture and a lot of turmoil in US society at that time. And this eventually led to the passage of the Controlled Substances Act. This picture shows President Richard Nixon signing the act. And it created the system that we still have today of controlled substance schedules, with LSD and psilocybin placed in Schedule 1, the most restrictive schedule. This schedule is defined as having, among other properties, no currently accepted medical use and also high potential for abuse. And so there's increasing tension as people document ways in which these compounds, when paired with therapy, do seem to have medical use. How to reconcile this with the legal restrictions on them? And this is something that will be playing out in the coming months and years. There's a application to the Food and Drug Administration for MDMA-assisted therapy to be a approved treatment of PTSD. And so if the FDA approves it as a medicine, but the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, says it has no currently accepted medical use, there's going to have to be some sort of reconciliation of those. But after this act was passed in the 1970s, there were still formally ways of doing research with psychedelics, but in practice, especially with human subjects research, it was virtually impossible to gain approval to do this. And really, there was almost no work that took place for decades afterwards. And it's really unprecedented, I would say, in US history, where there's an entire area of investigation that's almost impossible to do for legal, political, cultural reasons. And that's part of the excitement now, is that that's relaxing. There's more resources and more kind of precedents for being able to do this kind of research. And so in a way, we're sort of catching up to having decades of very little research on these compounds and their effects. And there's a real resurgence of interest in research going on now. And that's part of why our center was founded when it is. So some of the early steps towards this resurgence of research includes basic research on the effects of dimethyltryptamine, which is a psychedelic that's also a naturally occurring molecule in our bodies. These FDA-approved clinical trials of various combinations of psychedelics and therapy for treatment of mental health disorders. There's been studies on the relationship between psychedelics and the spiritual experiences that they elicit. And then more basic research on psychedelics, as I mentioned. Research tools to be able to learn fundamental properties about the mind and the brain and their relationships. So in our center, our focus is not on patient research. We're not studying people with mental health disorders. That I think is best done in clinical environments like medical schools and hospitals. Our strength at Berkeley is basic research, basic neuroscience and psychology research, and so that's what we're building on. And so we've got some studies on studying the psychedelic experience in real time and looking at perception and cognitive aspects, as well as the neuroscientific basis of the psychedelic experience in human subjects. We're also looking at other studies in which we are considering the more long-lasting effects. So psychedelics often produce enduring effects that last for a very long time after the drug has been eliminated from the body. And here we're focusing on emotion, learning and memory, perception, stress regulation, and also neural mechanisms. And then finally, animal experiments to understand better how psychedelics enhance plasticity at the cellular and molecular level. And I'll tell you about one of our research studies in human subjects that we are just about to launch in the coming weeks. This is based on a notion called predictive coding. The idea is that perception, even though it appears to us that our perception is kind of like a video camera where we're just recording the world around us, that's really an illusion, and perception is something that's actively constructed by the brain, and it's informed by sensory information, but it's also informed by all of our past experiences that enable us to take advantage of patterns and regularities that we've experienced and apply that to our perceptual inference, or our way of interpreting what's out there in the world. These are called priors, based on prior experience. And so our actual experience at any given time is a combination of our priors as well as the information that's coming from our sensory organs. So for visual perception, of course, those are our eyes. Here's an example of how we use priors. So these images that you see are actually the same image, just each one is inverted with respect to the other, turned upside down. On the left, you see craters inside of mounds, and on the right, you see mounds inside of craters, but that's actually something that you put onto the image with your brain. The image itself is ambiguous and doesn't have any 3D information in it. And it's only when we make the assumption based on our prior experience that light is probably coming from above in these scenes that disambiguates the image and enables us to determine which parts are concave and which parts are convex. But the image itself doesn't have that information. It's only in comparison with our previous experience that we can take this ambiguous image and see it in a more well-defined way. So this happens all the time. It kind of goes on under the hood of our perception. We're not really aware of it, but it's a really important part of how the brain processes information and generates our conscious experience. So with this in mind, we're testing this theory called relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. The basic idea is that psychedelics actually reduce the strength of priors in the brain and the predictions that arise from them. This is developed in the context of psychedelic-assisted therapy for mental health disorders. The idea is that priors for someone with depression include priors about self-narratives and about one's conception of themselves. And if someone who's depressed has internalized being the depressed person as part of their self-narratives, that makes it less likely that they will go out and try to achieve their goals and interact with others, and that can worsen the depression. And so in this case, it's priors that are unhealthy and maladaptive. And maybe what psychedelics are doing is reducing the reliance on those kinds of priors, and then together with the right type of therapeutic environment, creating new priors that are more healthy and adaptive. And so this theory's I think really intriguing for understanding the mechanisms of psychedelic-assisted therapy, but thinking about how to test it in the brain is very daunting because we really don't have a good idea about how things like self-narratives and conception, self-identity is represented in the brain. So in our study, we're taking the conceptual heart of this theory and moving it to the visual system where we understand much better priors and sensory information and how they interact with each other. And so this is a project that I'm leading in my lab with support from the BCSP, using psilocybin as a way of understanding how the brain actively generates our conscious perception of the world. So these are the kinds of stimuli that we'll use. We're going to combine psilocybin with modern brain imaging techniques. If you look at the stimulus on the left, you kind of see it as 4 lines moving up and down. The image on the right has these same 4 lines, but you have a very different perceptual experience. Here, we're using our prior information to group the 4 lines to create a percept of a coherent diamond that's moving left to right. And so we're interested in understanding how these same, and once you see the diamond moving back and forth on the right side, you can see the image on the left as the same sort of thing. And so this is a bistable percept. It, again, is ambiguous. It can be perceived in 2 different ways, one of which involves more predictive coding or priors than the other. And so we will be asking people to report their perceptual alternations between these 2 interpretations, and then look at the corresponding brain mechanisms and also understand how psilocybin is affecting the way that the brain is representing this information and generating our perception of it. We're also working together with Jack Gallant's lab in psychology and neuroscience to create detailed maps of the processing of different kinds of visual features in the environment and to kind of catalog and describe how those change with psychedelics. So getting a very broad kind of bird's eye view of many different representations of the environment in the brain and how those are affected by psilocybin specifically.
Michael, I have another question.
Yes.
Couple of questions. Is there research at UC Berkeley or elsewhere regarding potential use of these compounds on brain-based conditions or injuries such as concussions, traumatic brain injury, or other conditions regarding brain neural networks like Alzheimer's?
Let me bring up the chat. So
Okay,
I'm
it's
following.
actually in the questions.
Oh, got it.
So-
Okay.
So there's a couple questions there.
I'm only seeing the ayahuasca question actually for some reason. Okay, well, let me try to paraphrase. So the question is about studies of psychedelics on phenomena like concussion, traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's disease? And is the question about, is that work going on in general, or is it going on within our center specifically?
Here, I put the question in the chat. Hopefully you'll be able to see it.
Hmm.
Whoops, sorry. Okay, it should be there now. Whoops, do it again.
There we go. Okay. Yes, so the answer is to some extent. I mean, psychedelics research is there's still huge barriers to doing this kind of work, both in terms of funding and regulatory issues. The federal government is funding very little of this research. Most of it is funded by philanthropy, and so it's limited by the availability of those kinds of funds. There is work certainly on traumatic brain injury in the context of PTSD. A really interesting study just came out a few weeks ago on that, using the psychedelic compound ibogaine. And so the main focus has been on psychiatric disorders so far, so depression, anxiety, addictions, PTSD. But there is interest in looking at the effects of psychedelics as possible therapies for more neurological kinds of phenomena, such as brain injury and Alzheimer's disease. So, the field is really just coming to life, I would say, after a period of dormancy. And so there's still a lot of very basic descriptive work to be done about what kinds of conditions are psychedelic assisted therapy helpful for, and who's likely to benefit in terms of different patient populations. Another question about epilepsy. I'm actually not aware of anybody studying psychedelics in epilepsy, but like I said, there's many new studies cropping up right now, and so it's possible. But as far as I know, there's not any ongoing work on psychedelics as a possible treatment for epilepsy. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so one area we are looking at together with our colleagues Decker Keltner and Bill Jagist is psychedelics and aging. It's interesting to note that many of the effects of psychedelics actually are in the opposite direction of many of the effects of aging. And in some ways that can give us insight into the aging brain and body, and also maybe provides a way of promoting healthy aging. So we actually will be administering psychedelics to older participants, looking at the long-term effects on cognition, emotion, immune system function, as well as neural mechanisms. And Decker Keltner, many of you might know, is an expert on emotion research and has done work on awe in particular, the emotion awe, AWE. And it's of great interest to know, what are the qualities of the psychedelic experience that best predict the beneficial long-term outcomes in patient populations and in people who are healthy, so-called neurotypical subjects. And specifically, he'll be testing if psychedelics are a way of reliably eliciting awe, because awe is certainly beneficial for mental and physical health. And maybe that's part of the mechanism by which psychedelics are helpful. And so we'll be studying that specifically in the context of this study. The BCSP is supporting work in Andrea Gomez's lab in the molecular and cell biology and neuroscience departments on how psychedelics enhance neuroplasticity. And Andrea's lab does work looking at cellular and molecular correlates of plasticity, including RNA splicing, changes at synapses, and electrophysiological measures. And we're interested in expanding our research into many others. There's actually quite a few labs on our campus that are engaged in psychedelics research. Some of them have a more formal relationship with the BCSP, some not at this point. And so there's just tremendous interest and excitement in using these as research tools, and the BCSPs would like to kind of expand the community of psychedelic researchers that are connected to our center that way. This is our training program directed by Tina Trujillo, professor in education. So the BCSP certificate program in psychedelic facilitation, and this is providing training in professional development for people to learn about facilitating the psychedelic experiences of others. So critically, it's an experiential learning program. There are many religious and spiritual care professionals, such as chaplains and ministers in this program. There are also many healthcare professionals, social workers. So it's very diverse that way in terms of professional backgrounds. As our research studies with human subjects become launched, we are going to provide the participants in the training program with opportunities to be subjects in our research studies, which will give them insight into this kind of research, and also a legal way of obtaining a psychedelic experience, which is really not something that most training programs can offer, given the legal restrictions on psychedelic experiences. And then Tina's doing research within the training program on implement the evaluation of the training program. So there's really very little regulation in the field about what counts as a training program for psychedelic guides or facilitators, and what elements should they have. And so this it kind of combines research and education with the delivery of the program itself to determine which parts are most effective. And then also an ethnographic study of the participants of the program, as well as the instructors in the program that Tina is overseeing. Our public education and journalism offerings, Michael Pollan and David Presti are two of the key people here. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation about psychedelics, and some of it is, so it's just really difficult for people, especially without an academic background, to get reliable, fact-based, science-informed information about this. And so we see our center as being able to provide that, certainly building upon the reputation of UC Berkeley as a leading university. And so our website has a lot of information about current psychedelic science and research, risk reduction, but also cultural aspects, legal and political aspects. And over time, we want to be able to convene conversations about all of the really fascinating issues about psychedelics in society. So we have a lot of journalists in our group. It's important to maintain our journalistic credibility. So we're not going to be taking public positions on, for example, whether a drug should be legalized or not. but we are going to report information that is valuable to policymakers and also members of the general public about psychedelics and their benefits and risks and what sorts of things people should consider, and then all of the science associated with that. Part of this involves producing a newsletter called the Microdose that comes out twice a week. This is summary of news in the field of psychedelics, as well as interviews with a lot of the important people in the field. We also have a journalism fellowship program that, as I mentioned, funds aspiring journalists to write pieces and investigate pieces about psychedelics. So they get financial support to do their investigation and their writing, and then they publish it in periodicals such as National Geographic or Rolling Stone, or in some cases, there have been book deals that have come out of this. So we promote the kind of knowledge base of information about psychedelics through this program, sponsored by Tim Ferriss. We've also done some public polling work. This is directed by Imran Khan, our executive director of our center. So this uses the same kinds of methodologies that political polls do for elections. We collect nationwide polling data. And the fact is, we know very little collectively about the kinds of knowledge, beliefs, opinions that people have about psychedelics. But this information is really critical for people who are making decisions about legal and political policy aspects of psychedelics. And so we've got one data set that we've collected that has a lot of really fascinating observations about different trends and patterns of people's beliefs and knowledge about psychedelics. And the hope is that with funding from the BCSP, that we'll be able to continue this project over time and be able to look at how these are changing over time as awareness of psychedelics increases through various channels. We also have an online course that's free, that's directed by David Presti, called Psychedelics in the Mind, together with Nicole Vinola, our producer. This has interviews with many different experts in the field, and it covers really almost every aspect you can think of about psychedelics, and it's available to anybody. People who would like to earn a certificate of completion, there's a separate track that's paid verification and involves the ability to interact with some of the members of the course more directly. But the basic version of this is free to everyone, and this is part of the kind of principle of our center is we really believe strongly in public education and making the results of our work freely available to everybody. With that in mind, we center open science as a key part of what we do. See, there's some of the principles of open science that we've publicly declared that we adhere to. This includes placing the common good above private gain, sharing all of the results of our research with the public, and then not seeking to commercialize anything that we learn or discover through our center's work. We also have a strong emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as reciprocity. This takes many forms. We try to make our center, the members of our various teams, as diverse as possible. In our research studies, as we recruit participants and also trainees in our psychedelic facilitation program, we emphasize diversity there as well. Indigenous traditions are a really important aspect of psychedelics, but obviously this needs to be done, these needs to be considered in a culturally sensitive way that doesn't involve appropriation of Indigenous knowledge. And so the goal of the BCSP is to build relationships, reciprocal relationships with various Indigenous peoples. In the meantime, certainly there's a strong component of Indigenous knowledge in the training program curriculum, but we also strive to include Indigenous voices in, for example, our microdose interviews, and other public education offerings, such as our MOOC, our massive open online course. We made a concrete commitment to promoting DEI and reciprocity in our center by pledging 10% of our unrestricted gifts to these activities. So, as I mentioned, all of our work is funded by philanthropy. Some of those philanthropic gifts are unrestricted. They're gifts to the center to use as we see fit in terms of prioritizing. And so that class of gifts that are not earmarked for a particular project, 10% of that work of those funds go to DEI and reciprocity activities. Through that, we have had one cohort of Indigenous research student fellows. These are UC Berkeley students, both undergraduates and graduates, who are either in historically marginalized communities and or whose work addresses issues of reciprocity and equity. And this is our group of the initial 7 Indigenous Research Student Fellows. So really delighted to be able to support their work and to help them to make additional ties within various communities on our campus. So coming to the topic of funding, all of these programs cost money, of course. And currently, all of our funding is from philanthropy, individual gifts, and as well as foundations. As I've mentioned, the ethics and values, the mission of our center is very informed by the fact that we're in a public university and that we believe in the mission of UC Berkeley to serve the public. And so this has informed how we do fundraising. And in some cases, for example, there are corporations that are involved in creating commercial products in the world of psychedelics. Some of them have approached us with the possibility of partnering. And in the end, we just saw that there was too big of a gap between some of these companies and what we stand for as a center in terms of what we would do with the knowledge that we obtain. And so we don't have corporate partnerships, but it also makes us even more reliant on the philanthropic gifts from individuals and groups. I also mentioned the government funding is almost non-existent. So, the neuroscience research, for example, that would typically be funded by organizations such as the National Institutes of Health or other government agencies. And I think mainly for political and cultural reasons, that has been slow to be allocated to psychedelics research. That may be changing over the coming years. But as it is now, the center is reliant on philanthropy. And so if you or anybody you know is interested in supporting the work that we do, you can go to our website, psychedelics.berkeley.edu, and we would be very happy to have your support to continue our research, training, and public education. Some plans for the future. We actually do have a gift to create a BCSP podcast in the area of psychedelics, as well as journalism fellowships that aren't print-based, but are rather video-based. We recently announced a new partnership with Harvard that will support people working in the humanities, social sciences, and arts. And so this is the Psychedelics in Society and Culture. You may have seen announcements of this. We're currently taking applications for proposals in these areas. So this will expand us outside of the domain of science and education into these exciting new areas in humanities and arts and social sciences. We certainly want to build on our existing strengths as well: journalism, neuroscience, psychology research, as well as molecular and cellular research. And over time, have more and more public events and convenings, both for our campus community, as well as to be sort of a hub for different groups within the psychedelics world outside of the university as well. And with that, thanks so much for your attention. And I hope I've left enough time to be able to take questions. And I'll turn my screen off so I can see everybody and you can see me.
It looks like there's a question in chat, Michael, if you want to take a look at that, or do you want me to read it to you?
I can see it.
Okay.
Is there any possibility for funding from the state of California? Currently, there's very minimal funding. So there is a lot of funding for cannabis research, I would say, and that's based on dedicated funds within the state. For psychedelics research, not yet, although just this week, some state politicians, including Scott Wiener, introduced a bill, again, to the California Assembly. So a couple of bills have been introduced to promote access to psychedelics that have not been successful. One of them was vetoed by Gavin Newsom recently. This one, as my understanding is, it does have a fund, at least for public education, and certainly would establish kind of a regulatory framework for people to have psychedelic experiences in the context of a therapeutic environment. And so who knows if that bill will pass in its current form, but that's a possibility in the future. There was a very ambitious ballot initiative that was in the works that would have provided an enormous amount of state funding, analogous to the stem cell initiative that was passed several years ago. That was abandoned by the organizers and unclear what the future of that is. So I would say the answer is no. There's not really much funding from the state of California now, but there is interest, and and it's the field is changing so rapidly, public opinion is changing so rapidly. It's certainly something that could be the case in the future. Another question in the chat. Are there plans or desires to look at how psychedelics may affect functional connectivity using fMRI, specifically looking at networks such as the default mode network? So it's a fairly technical question. The short answer is kind of, I guess. So Robin Carhart Harris has done a lot of really important work in this area, specifically looking at functional connectivity and the default mode network with psychedelics. He is affiliated with our center. He's a professor at UCSF now. So we will be collaborating with him. Our main interest in functional connectivity are actually more in the visual system, because we can identify, we can objectively identify the sort of different nodes of the visual processing in the context of visual perception and priors that I mentioned earlier. So I would say we will be doing some measurements of functional connectivity that involve the default mode network, but it's not a primary outcome measure. It's more of a kind of secondary one, but we're interested in it. We're very inspired by Robin's work. That his rebus theory is really provided a lot of kind of theoretical framing of the research that we're doing. And so it is an area that we will be looking at, but not the main focus of the initial research studies. How can prospective research subjects find trials? So in our center, we have if you go to our research page, you'll see an email address there, bcspresearch@gmail.com. You can express your interest there in participating in studies, and then our clinical research coordinators will respond and tell you what the opportunities are as they arise. So that's a single email address for all of our human research studies, or I should say our human neuroscience research studies. More broadly, in the US, groups that are doing psychedelic trials register their trials at a website called clinicaltrials.gov. And this includes all the clinical trials that are going on. And so it's really, something that the federal government provides for the people of the US, the citizens of the US, to learn about clinical trials and opportunities. You can see which ones are enrolling, which ones are still planned, which ones are completed, and what some of the criteria are. So broadly speaking, across the country, clinicaltrials.gov. Locally, our website, psychedelics.berkeley.edu, and specifically the email address, bcspresearch@gmail.com.
Okay, looks like there is no more question. So anybody has any more question to ask? So if not, thank you, Professor Silver. That was very informative. So let's give a round of applause for Professor Silver. It was very good. I was very interested in learning about psychedelics research and how brain processes our prior information actively generates our conscious perception of the world. And to learn about the therapy about, that's helping depression and PTSD. It was very interesting. Thank you for sharing your research with us. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm happy to. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And it was like, we're sorry to know that NIH doesn't have the funding at this moment to support this research. I just hope that California bills and the state funding get processed and the bills get passed. So we will hope for that. Everyone, thank you again for joining us today for the BRAG meeting. I just let's just put a short survey link in the chat. So please take your time to complete the survey, and also give us not only give your feedback on today's meeting, also recommend any future topics that you like us to cover. And we will also send the survey link via email. One other thing, please note that our next BRAG meeting will be in March. So keep an eye on your email for more details on our next meeting. So if anybody has any questions, we still have time. If not, then we will bring our meeting to an end today. And we will see you next month. So you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Michael.
Take care.
Thank you.